Grand Ole Opry legend Stringbean Akeman and his wife were killed in their home in 1973. Before his death, Roy Clark opened up about one of country music's darkest nights, the devastating death of his friend and fellow performer, David Stringbean Akeman. For years, fans have speculated what really went down and why this story continues to elicit such strong feelings in Nashville. Join us as we recall Roy Clark's revelations. David Stringbean Akeman early life. Stringbean, otherwise known to the world as David Akeman, born in the hills of Jackson County, Kentucky on June 17, 1915. His early years were shaped by the land, the times, and the family that raised him. Jackson County was a rural place where most families made a living through farming and simple labor. Life was simple, but it was also challenging. Families had to make every penny count, and often comfort was paid for with their survival. David was one of many children in the Akeman home. His parents worked hard to put food on the table, and he learned from an early age that each member of the family had to do his share. There was not much money for extras and luxuries. If something was broken, it needed to be fixed, not replaced. If the family wanted entertainment, they made it themselves with music or stories or a gathering of the neighbors. In this simple way of life, there grew in him a deep respect for hard work and for the small joys that came from family and community. David had wanted a banjo of his own as a boy, but there was not much money. Buying an instrument just wasn't affordable to his family at that time. Yet he wasn't one to give up easily. He picked up what he could, an old shoe box, a stick, and some strings, and he constructed a banjo-like instrument for himself. It wasn't much to look at, but it gave him something to practice on to start learning the sounds that fascinated him. That homemade banjo was his first venture into music. Later, his determination paid off. David's love of music and the sacrifices country music can make were both evident when he made a trade as a young man. Families often needed he traded 2 chickens for a real banjo. For him, it was worth 100 times the trade. That instrument was his best friend and never far from him. From then on, he practiced constantly, teaching himself songs and rhythms until the banjo became a part of him. But first, before music could whisk David away from farm life, he had to go through some of the hardest years in American history. He was still young when the Great Depression hit. Banks failed across the country, jobs disappeared, families who were already struggling had less and less to live on. For people like the Amens, the Depression was more than the headlines in the news. Empty cupboards, long hours of work for little pay, neighbors losing farms they worked their whole lives to maintain. To help support himself and his family, David joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, a government program designed to give young men jobs during the Depression. His work with the Corps brought him to the outside, where he labored in road building, tree planting, and public land improvements. And soon enough, the world would see how this tall, skinny kid from Kentucky took those lessons early on and created a career that had people laughing, singing, and remembering him for decades. But as his story became more brilliant, so did the shadows around him. Becoming Stringbean, especially the one thing he could never shake, his fear of losing money. By the time David Akeman was in his late teens and early 20s, music was not a thing. Just a hobby, it was emerging as a way forward. He'd already established a reputation in his Kentucky community as a gifted banjo player and instinctive entertainer. He was always there with his banjo whenever there was a local competition or a local gathering. He could charm people, not just through his playing, but wit as well. He could insert a humorous line or a teasing comment between songs, and that mix of music and comedy made him unique from the start. It was in one of these contests, David caught the eye of an old-time musician named Asa Martin. A respected performer in Kentucky, Martin frequently invited younger talents to perform with him. He liked the tall, skinny young man who played his banjo so feelingly and made his audience laugh. Martin's group had invited David, giving him the chance to perform away from local functions. But David didn't have the stage name yet that people would get to know him by. The night Asa Martin introduced him on stage, he couldn't remember David's last name. Martin looked at his lanky frame and quickly filled in the gap with the name Stringbeans. The name caught on because the crowd liked it. Eventually, it was shortened to String Bean, and that became David's lifelong identity in the music world. After that, the name suited him as well as his banjo did. String Bean, a stage name and experience under his belt, began moving his career forward. His big break came early on, 1940s, when he joined Bill Monroe's band, the Bluegrass Boys. Bill Monroe had already established himself as the father of bluegrass, and his band was a proving ground for the best new talent. It was an honor for String Bean to be able to join Monroe's band, and an opportunity to learn from some of the best musicians of the era. String Bean broke away from Monroe's group to work with other performers, and a most important partnership of his life was with Grandpa Jones. Jones was also a banjo player and comic entertainer with a similar taste for old-time music and humor as String Bean was. They also became good friends as well as professional partners, appearing together in shows that combined songs with lighthearted comedy. Their chemistry on stage made them favorites with the audience, and they became a staple in the world of country entertainment. The real turning point in String Bean's career was when he began playing the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. The Opry was the heart of country music, and performing there was a mark of real success. For String Bean, the Opry was more than a playground. It's where he created the stage persona that made him a beloved figure across the country. String Bean fused his banjo playing and his comedy routines on the op stage, creating a style of performance all his own. He also created a signature look that audiences never forgot. He wore baggy shirts and baggy pants with suspenders and old-fashioned hats. He looked a bit silly in the outfit, but that was the idea. It made folks laugh before he spoke a word. His music, his humor, and his costume all contributed to String Bean's image as the humble, funny banjo picker who never took himself too seriously. String Bean's life was about to change again when he met the woman who would be with him for the rest of his days. Life with Estelle. In 1945, with the end of World War II and the country moving back into a PCM setting, David Stringbean Akeman married Estelle Stanfield. Their marriage was the stable cornerstone of his life, giving him the sense of home and comfort he had always longed for. To all who encountered Estelle, she was a gentle, kind, and very supportive person. She didn't like the spotlight and preferred to stay in the background, but she was always proud of String Bean and stood by him throughout his career. The couple's relationship was often described as one of quiet devotion. They had no children, but that never seemed to diminish the strength of their bond. Their friends and fellow musicians could see what they meant to each other. String Bean was the one that was bringing the crowd and the stage to life with his music, but off stage, it was Estelle who gave him the stability and peace. They didn't shout their love from the rooftops, but you could see it in the way they lived together. Shortly after they married, String Bean and Estelle moved into a house that spoke to their personalities. They decided to settle in a small log cabin in Ridgetop, Tennessee. A series of While String Bean's peers used their fame and money to buy bigger houses, expensive cars, or other luxuries, the Akamans took a different path. Their cabin was rustic, simple, and cozy. It had a wood stove for heat, a garden Estelle kept carefully, and chickens for eggs. Most of their meals were homemade, often using ingredients they grew or raised themselves. Some of the fans who saw String Bean every week on stage at the Grand Ole Opry might have been surprised by this kind of life. Or the popular television show Hee Haw. To outsiders, it might have seemed strange that a nationally known performer should live so simply. But it was the only way it felt right to String Bean and Estelle. Fancy stuff wasn't needed for them to feel successful. They found happiness in simple living, gardening, fishing, hunting, and quiet time together. When the laughter and music of the stage had died away, they lived modestly, in part because String Bean had a profound distrust of banks. This distrust ran all the way back to his boyhood in the Great Depression. As a young man, he had seen families lose their savings as banks closed their doors overnight. He never forgot the fear and helplessness that spread in those years, and it formed the way he handled money for the rest of his life. Even when he was successful and earning a regular salary from music, he still refused to put his money in a bank. String Bean decided to hold on to his earnings instead. He had cash with him, and there he found Strange at home. hiding places for money. Some say he kept money in the chimney. Some thought it was under the floorboards or behind loose bricks in the walls. It was never quite known just how much he had stashed away, but rumors flew fast about town. Stories began to circulate that Stringbean was stashing thousands of dollars in that little cabin. But their home life was peaceful on the outside, but their habits, especially the hidden cash, would one day attract dangerous attention. And before long, that attention would come from the worst kind of people, the deadly night. For most people who knew David Stringbean Akeman, November 10th, 1973 began like any other Saturday. Stringbean had a routine he rarely broke, and this night was no different. He and Estelle got ready for their weekly trip to Nashville, where he was to sing at the Grand Ole Opry. Stringbean was in good form that night at the Opry. He played his banjo and told his jokes and entertained the crowd the way he always had. Fellow workers of musicians later remembered that nothing about the night seemed unusual. Estelle was with him, as always. Backstage, she was a quiet presence, talking politely with others, but her focus was on her husband. To Stringbean, having her with him was simply the way they lived. When the Oprah was over, Stringbean went his usual way. He and Estelle left the show and returned to their Ridgetop, Tennessee, cabin. The drive was routine, and in all respects, nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary. To the outside world, it was another Saturday night. But trouble was already waiting for Stringbean at home, while he was out playing music and making people laugh. Earlier that evening, two cousins, John and Marvin Brown, both with records of theft and petty crime, had broken into the Akeman cabin. They were raised poor and restless, often in trouble with the law. And in recent months, they had grown more reckless. The Browns had heard the rumors that had been circulating for years, that Stringbean didn't trust banks and kept large amounts of cash at his home. Stories were told around town of thousands of dollars hidden away in his chimney, under his floors, or behind his walls. The Browns heard the rumors and thought they sounded like an opportunity. That November night, they broke into the cabin and waited for it. A simple scheme it was. Ambush Stringbean when he come home, scare him, and take whatever money they could find. There was bound to be a hidden fortune in the little modest home, they were sure. It was late, almost midnight, when Stringbean and Estelle came home from the Opry. They pulled up to the car and walked toward the cabin, not knowing what danger lay inside. Stringbean went first. The Browns were on him all at once. Accounts say that John Brown fired the first shot, hitting Stringbean in the doorway. He went down and died almost immediately. Estelle turned and ran back out of the cabin, terrified. She ran toward the car, hoping to escape or find help. But she didn't get very far. Marvin Brown went after her and shot her outside by the car. Minutes later, it was all over in a blaze of violence, and the couple's quiet life was shattered. The Browns searched the cabin, desperate to find the fortune they knew was hidden somewhere within. But what they found was a whole lot less than they expected. They thought there were thousands of dollars stashed away, and there was only a little bit of cash. The rest of the alleged treasure was nowhere to be found. The following morning, Stringbean's close friend and Opry star, Grandpa Jones, had come to the cabin. The two had planned to go hunting together, something they did often together. Jones drove up to the house. He expected Stringbean to be there waiting, gear packed. Instead, he was faced with a sight that haunted the rest of his life. Jones saw Estelle's body by the car. He rushed in shock toward the house and found Stringbean lying just beyond the doorway. When he realized what had happened, he left at once to get help. The moment he described later as one of the most painful memories he ever experienced. Many years later, Grandpa Jones never forgot about finding his dear friends in such a tragic state. News of the murder spread fast, and the reverberations were felt not only in Nashville, but across the country music industry. Fans and fellow performers and neighbors were shocked. It was impossible to believe that such a couple, so humble and kind-hearted, could be taken in such a brutal way. And soon the search for justice would start, unearthing details that friends and fans stunned. The shocking murders of Stringbean and Estelle Akeman sent shockwaves through the Nashville community, sparking a manhunt for the killers. Friends and fans mourned, and neighbors whispered about who could have committed such a cruel act. Before long, suspicion began to mount, and the trail led to two cousins already well known to law enforcement, John and Marvin Brown. In the wake of the murders, talk was buzzing in the little town of Ridgetop. Everybody knew about There had been long-existing rumors of Stringbean's hidden money, and many suspected at once that robbery had been the motive. But it was the sudden behavior of John and Marvin Brown which first caught any real attention. Both had criminal records, mostly for theft, and people were wary of their reputations. But the most striking thing was their spend. Shortly after the murders, people in the area noticed the Browns suddenly had more cash than normal. They bought things they couldn't normally afford, flashing, money to talk about, and talking too much. This was observed immediately in a small town where everyone observed minor changes. Those who knew them quietly passed their concerns on to the police. The kind of loose talk and ostentatious behavior that made investigators suspect the cousins might actually be involved in the crime. Police started keeping a close eye on the Browns. They gathered testimonies from local people who had observed the sudden change in their habits. Some said they heard the men talking about Stringbean or about money in ways that didn't feel good. Others commented on how anxious they looked when the murders were mentioned. Investigators also looked for physical evidence. The crime scene had told much of the story of what had happened inside the cabin, but the key was linking it directly to the Browns. Eventually, the police put enough details together to get a strong case. Brown was in possession of some stolen goods that were traced to the Akeman home, along with the suspicious timing of their. Every day, the case against them grew stronger because of the movements and the strange spending spree. It did not take long for the police to have their men. Both cousins were arrested within weeks of the murders, providing a small comfort to a community still reeling from the violent deaths of two beloved neighbors. The arrests were just the beginning. The subsequent trial attracted intense attention, not only from the local community, but from the entire country music world. Fans called for justice for Stringbean and Estelle, and that process played out in the courtroom. Testimonies came from all directions. Grandpa Jones, who found the bodies, made emotional statements about the morning he arrived at the scene. Other Opry musicians also talked about Stringbean's character and routine, helping to establish the timeline of his final hours. Investigators outlined the evidence they had collected from the Brown suspicious spending to their possession of stolen items. In the end, the court handed down heavy sentences. The gunman, John Brown, was sentenced to 198 years in the prison, a sentence that would ensure he would never be free again. Marvin Brown received a lesser sentence, but one that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. Years later, he died in prison, never seeing freedom. And even with the killers in prison, one mystery still haunted them all. The mystery of the hidden fortune. What became of Stringbean's hidden money? When David was Stringbean Akeman and wife, the murder of Estelle in 1973 shocked Nashville and the country music world. But over the next few days and years, another layer of the story began to unfold. A mystery concerning money tucked away in the Ace cabin. As it transpired, the rumors that people had whispered about for years were not untrue. Money was found in the oddest places in the Ace cabin after the murders by investigators. Money in little packages was hiding in a pair of boots, inside the chimney, and behind sections of the cabin walls. When it was all tallied, the tucked-away cash amounted to about $20,000, a lot of money in the early 1970s, especially for someone who lived so simply. Those who knew Stringbean were not totally surprised by the discovery. He had lived through the Great Depression when banks closed and many families lost all. That experience engendered in him a lifelong suspicion of financial institutions. He liked to have his earnings close by where he could see them and touch them. It was safer for him to keep his money at home than to trust it to anyone else. But the actual amount still surprised people. All his life, Stringbean had been a careful man with his money. Music and TV were a good living for him, but nobody expected him to have thousands of dollars stashed away. The first discovery of a cache of money sent speculation soaring. Neighbors and fans alike began to question how much more Stringbean may have been in hiding. Some people said he squirreled away tens of thousands of dollars more. Others said the cabin was a veritable vault of hidden compartments ready to be uncovered. These rumors quickly turned the Akeman home into a curiosity. Well after the murders, rumors spread of intruders and treasure hunters sneaking onto the property at night in hopes of finding another hidden bundle. Authorities secured the cabin following the crime, but interest in the so-called fortune never actually went away. The story of the hidden treasure became part of Stringbean's legend, as memorable as his music and comedy. The story was about a man who was so distrustful of banks that he scattered money throughout his cabin, creating a decades-long mystery. Then, 20-plus years later, the rumors turned out to be true again. In 1996, during renovation of the cabin, workers found another hidden stash. They found about $20,000 behind a wall sealed for decades. More in cash, but by then the bills were of no value. They were ruined by time and damp. The paper was decayed. The currency was not exchangeable. It was a curio now, a physical demonstration of Stringbean's habits, but no longer of any monetary value. What had been a small fortune. The second discovery added to the speculation. If money was buried that deep in the walls, what else was still buried in the cabin or on the surrounding property? While the notion of undiscovered hoards has never been completely eliminated, and no other discoveries have ever been announced. Another struggle went along with the mystery of Stringbean's hidden fortune. The question of what would be left and who would get what. Stringbean and Estelle had no children, and there was no will when they died. The estate remained to be settled by the court. Relatives from both sides staked claims, and there were legal battles. Ultimately, most of the property and possessions passed to Estelle's family, but the fights made things tense, and the discoveries of hidden money only complicated things further. Each new discovery brought questions of who owned it and who would benefit in the end. Most of Stringbean's estate was eventually divided up in the courts, but questions about his hidden wealth cast a shadow over the process. He preferred to keep his money in hiding places rather than in banks, and this not only affected his daily life, but also left a legacy of mystery and conflict after his death. And as the mystery continued, and fans kept remembering what really defined Stringbean, the music and happiness he shared with the world, and the dark consequences. Decades after Stringbean and Estelle Akeman were murdered, the story didn't lie dormant. The tragedy stayed in public conversation through new developments, surprising decisions, and lingering questions. One of the more shocking moments came in 2014 when John Brown, one of the killers, was released from prison. When John Brown was convicted in the 1970s, the sentence was supposed to make sure he never walked free again. He received 198 years in prison, a sentence that made it clear how serious his crime was. That sentence brought a small measure of comfort to many people. It meant the man who pulled the trigger would spend the rest of his life in prison. However, in 2014, more than 40 years after the murders, it was announced that John Brown would be released on parole. At the time, he was 64 years old, and parole officials said he no longer posed a danger to society. The decision was met with fury. Country music fans, friends of Stringbean, and members of Estelle's family expressed the disappointment. The brutality of the crime could never be repaid by time served to them. Many see the release of Brown as an insult to the memory of the couple and to a community that had never really recovered from the loss. Brown's own words after his release did little to ease feelings, to make matters worse. He gave conflicting statements and interviews, sometimes sounding detached and unapologetic, sometimes expressing regret. Many felt he had no true remorse for what he had done, and it only added to the fury of people who had been angry about the parole decision. The release of John Brown brought forward again old questions which had never been fully answered. One of the biggest questions was whether John and Marvin Brown had acted alone. Some locals have long suspected that there might have been a third accomplice. The theory was that someone else had been at the cabin that night or helped to plan the crime. Nothing was ever proved, but the suspicion remained. One question left unanswered was how well the Browns knew Stringbean's schedule. His routine was the same. Play at the Opry on Saturday nights and then go home. But did the Browns take advantage of a known habit, or were they tipped off? Some speculated that an insider from the Opry or a neighbor may have tipped them off, but no evidence ever surfaced to back that theory. The absence of answers to the questions gave rise to a multitude of theories and rumors as time went by. Some thought the Browns had an inside source close to Stringbean, while others were sure they acted alone, but just happened to guess his schedule right. Rumors of the hidden fortune grew even louder when, in 1996, another $20,000 was found in the cabin walls. If money was still being found after more than 20 years, who knew there wasn't more? This, fueling speculation that the Browns had taken more than anyone knew, or that there was still more hidden money somewhere, waiting to be discovered. Answers to these questions remain unclear to this day. Fans, local residents, and historians who remember the events still have plenty of theories. The tragedy hurts to recall, but for many, the mystery is part of what keeps the story alive. If you enjoyed this video, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming up.